Radio check, radio check, radio check. This is the Explorers Pod over.
4, 3, 2, 1.
Yeah, I saw that you guys had a crazy cold snap there. I guess you lost a lot of power as well. They shut down half the state's power or something like that.
Yeah, I was lucky. I kept my power, but yeah, a lot of my plants are dead now. I have some orange trees; they're dead. So, thankfully I was okay. A lot of people died. It was awful.
Oh my God!
A bad.
I could just imagine.
Bad situation.
Yeah, pretty much made national or international news. Crazy story. What really happened there? Do you know?
You know, the bottom lines weren't prepared for it. They deregulated the power industry 20 years ago. And so I just had to sign up for power, and there's like 100 companies you have to pick from. So it's really this deregulation. The good news is the rates are cheap. The bad news is if we have a cold spell, the power goes out. So there's pluses and minuses to it.
Yeah, for
there's
sure.
Pluses and minuses. Sometimes a little regulation is a good thing. I'm not a big fan of lots of regulation, but you know, they just need make sure the plant can operate in really cold weather, because it doesn't happen often, but when it happens, it's a disaster.
Yeah, it was pretty bad.
Yeah.
I saw something cool. I kind of been following your Twitter recently. I saw you were in Colorado doing some skiing a few weeks back.
Yeah.
How was that?
I gotta post some more stuff. I'm holding on to my some of these images. I've got a couple really cool images. In fact, I need to make reservations to go back out there soon. Yeah, I love Colorado, and I don't ski that much, maybe twice, but it's awesome.
Cool. Where'd you go? What was the resort? Where'd you spend your time?
I go to a place called Ski Cooper. It's this really small resort out near Leadville.
Okay.
And the snow is amazing, and they've got, I don't know, 20 or 30 runs. It's not they just a couple of lifts, and there's nobody there. I never wait more than 0 second. Literally the whole time I was there, I just skied right on the lift.
Right up to the lift. Cool.
It's good. It's not, well, they do have some double diamonds. I like the blues. I'm more of a blue skier, and it's just awesome. If you want to learn how to snowboard, it's great because it's not too crowded, and it's beautiful. It's great. It's probably a third of the cost of the big mountains, of Vail. So I'm a big fan of Ski Cooper. I kind of don't want to say that though, because I don't want big crowds.
Yeah, right. Hey, keep
like
that down. It's top secret.
Yeah.
Right.
It's pretty awesome.
Yeah, I get it. I did some skiing in Colorado when I was younger. We went to Steamboat Springs a few times, and it was the absolute best snow I've ever been in. It's an incredible place.
Steamboat's cool. We went there after Cooper, so I was there a couple weeks ago. Steamboat. I didn't ski there, but I had dinner there.
Cool.
It's a great town.
Sorry, one last thing. I want to talk about because you're in Houston now. Yeah. I presume.
I am.
I saw that. Just this morning that the governor lifted all the mandates in Texas for COVID.
And I've been meaning to tweet. I'm like, hey y'all, we gotta keep on masking up, because Houston's a great town. It is the first city, I think, in the world, or at least in America, that has all 5 major variants of COVID at the same time. So this is not the time, something simple like keeping your mask on it's just polite. I don't want to be around people without masks on. So I hope people, even though the mandate's not there, I hope people still wear masks, because I don't want to get breathed on by somebody with COVID, to be honest. I haven't had the vaccine yet. So
right.
I'm trying. I haven't gotten it yet, and I'm trying to avoid getting it. But I also don't want to stay in my house all the time. So a mask is a good, pretty easy thing to do to avoid that.
Right. Yeah, well, I like the idea that it's a choice. And, I think there's a lot of educated people out there are going to do the right thing. So let's hope for the best. But it's great to hear that at least the state's loosening up on, people are going to be able to go back to work again. So that's positive.
Oh, yeah. Well, Texas has been at work. We haven't. I love that. The place has been open. Restaurants are open. The mall's open. You've been able to live life. I think other places really did hard lockdowns, and so it's actually been pretty good in Texas. If you need to go to the mall to get a pair of shorts or whatever, you can do that. It's good to wear masks so you don't breathe on other people
Right.
while you're doing that.
Yeah, we've had it pretty hard here in the Philippines. We've been locked down now for a year, and we live we're an island nation, and to travel amongst the islands, if you take a ferry, when you arrive, you have to spend 2 weeks in quarantine. So it's pretty difficult, and we really run on tourism where we're at, and that's obviously shut down. No one's allowed to come here for a year now.
Yeah.
So
That's
we're
brutal.
reinventing ourselves here. This is our new
Right.
thing. So
Doing podcasts.
yeah, Janet and I've been guiding expeditions in the Himalayas and here in Palawan, some island boat expeditions for about
Wow.
10 years now. So that sort of came to an end last March, and
All right.
here we are trying this new
I was
thing.
speaking for a living, so I was doing basically paid speaking to put food on the table, and that came to an end, a year ago. So I feel your pain.
Yeah, man.
Yeah.
This year's taxes are much different than last year's taxes. Tax
Yeah,
return.
all of us are really going through a lot of challenges, but
Yeah.
Colonel Terry Virts, finally, it's really nice to meet you and talk to you. Here we are. We've really been very excited to have this day and to have this interview with you. And we may not have a snowstorm here, but we're welcoming you from a warm, hot summer in the Philippines. So welcome and thank you
Oh, wow.
so much for your time. We know that you're very busy, but we are really very grateful and honored that you're here with us in our podcast.
Yeah,
Welcome.
thank you, welcome. Yeah, we had to turn the
of course.
fans off, and it's hot as hell. We don't want the fan to mess up the audio.
Ugh,
Yeah. It's a bit-
Okay.
right. Sorry about that. I can see the sweat.
Yeah, you can see it. Okay.
We're in the tropics.
Yeah. So
Do the honor.
Yeah.
so tell us a little bit about your childhood. Tell us about the formative years. Give us a little bit of background about your history, a little snatch from your past.
So I had a pretty typical American middle class background. I was in Maryland, in between Baltimore and Washington. I had my mom was a secretary actually at NASA Goddard. It's a unmanned NASA Space Center, and my dad also worked there. He was a technician, and my parents were divorced. So my stepdad was an engineer, and he built instruments that went on satellites. So
Cool.
he has a pretty cool distinction. He built ion mass spectrometers and magnetometers, so instruments to help satellites navigate basically
Right
and
on.
do science. And his stuff has been to every planet in the solar system and has
Wow.
left the solar system.
Wow.
So he had a pretty cool career building instruments. Those were kind of NASA's hate full time. It's a cool now, but there's really cool stuff going on. So I chopped wood, and we had a wood burning stove. That was my job, was to start a fire to heat the house. And I went to public school. I went to a great public school in Howard County. It was a public school, so I kind of had a normal childhood.
Right.
Back
Normal
in the
American
70s and 80s.
childhood.
It was pretty awesome.
Cool. Yes.
Yeah. I was really lucky because my parents, my mom and my dad didn't go to college, but they really supported me. So all this stuff that I was doing, they kind of had never done themselves, but they got me a camera, so I had to teach myself photography, and they got me a TRS-80 computer, and I had to teach myself BASIC. And my dad got me a telescope, and I had to teach myself where the stars were and how to, find galaxies and planets and all that kind of stuff. So it was really good for me to learn how to do that stuff on my own, which was it kind of teaches you self-reliance and independence, and that was really important for me.
Yeah, I've kind of been on that journey as well. I taught myself how to climb and how to be a sailor. I taught myself, I basically
Oh, wow.
picked up the book Sailing for Dummies and bought my first boat. And the next year I took off to sail around the world when I was 26 years old. So I had to really learn how to
That
become
sounds safe. every mom's nightmare.
totally,
But it's
I had a girlfriend at the time, awesome. And they were like, "Nah, you're not going with that guy." Yeah. So
that I know the spirit. When I was I don't know, 16, I went to live in Finland. I lived with a family on an exchange. So I, was gone at age 16. I was 17. I went to the Air Force Academy, and I haven't been back since. So, I have that wanderlust, I guess, also.
Yeah. So when I was younger, I had a teacher. His name was Pat Gabby. He's my 6th grade teacher, and he was really a brilliant guy. And he's one of my great mentors, young mentors, And I sort of took a lot of his spirit and the lessons that he gave me through my journey of life. Do you have anybody like that from your childhood?
Yeah, I have Mr. Thrasher. He was like the 7th grade social studies teacher, and teacher. His name just escaped me. Mr. Craig was my math teacher in high school. I've been writing a lot. I was actually just writing right before this podcast. I finished a scene. I'm writing a screenplay.
All right.
And, I was probably the least likely to write a book in high school because I was sucked at English.
Yeah.
And I tortured my English teachers, and now here I am writing.
Awesome.
So it's funny how, my English teachers I remember very well. My French teacher I remember very well. I ended up minoring in French, and I did an exchange at the French Air Force Academy, and
right.
I speak French a lot. And that teacher that I had in high school is the reason why.
Cool.
And so it's amazing what an impact teachers can have on you.
Yeah, I think so as well.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
So, when I was younger, I didn't read a lot of books, but eventually, when I started sailing, I really got into reading because I got a lot of free time laying in my bunk. But when I was younger, I picked up a book called Cosmos by Carl Sagan, and that had a pretty profound impact on me. Do you have any books similar to that? Do you have any books that grounded you?
Absolute book I read, like the first book I read in kindergarten or whatever, was about Apollo, and that kind of inspired me to be an astronaut. And then when I was 13, I read The Right Stuff.
Cool.
By Tom Wolfe.
Yeah.
And it's a great movie. There's a new Nat Geo is doing. I was just started watching the series. I actually met the crew of this new series after last world record where we flew around the Earth, and I directed I directed my first documentary called One More Orbit. And after we landed, the crew of The Right Stuff was there just to learn about here's the Space Center and here's what it's like to be an astronaut. So I walked over, and they're like meeting a real astronaut. It was really cool. And I was picking out, all right, you're Alan Shepard and you're Gus Grissom. I was just guessing, and I was right. Actually, even they had the astronaut wives were there, the actresses were there. And so anyways, so The Right Stuff was the book I read. I question the same way. The Right Stuff impacted a lot of us.
That's cool.
Yeah, nice book. I like
Well,
it.
yeah, speaking of books, how is your virtual book tour going for your new book? How to
For the
astronaut.
How to astronaut, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've got it over here.
Oh, cool.
We're going to throw a screenshot up when we present it, so.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
It really good. The publisher is called Workman. They're in New York. They're amazing. They're so good. They have gotten really big stories in lots of different press, and so like they could not have done more to promote the book. It's gotten lots of really great reviews by book reviewers, and so they did a great job. They were going to send me on a 20-city book tour, and instead it was a couple weeks of Zoom calls, which is good and bad. They say the only thing worse than being out on a book tour is not being on a book tour.
Right.
So it's a lot of work to travel and signing books all the time, but it's also gives you that adrenaline rush. So it was a bummer to have to do it via Zoom, but it was really fun writing it, and I've gotten a lot of positive feedback from it. So people seem to like the How to Astronaut book.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
Thanks.
I just started reading a little bit of it the last couple of days, through the first few pages on Amazon, where you can sort of start to read the book. Hope to get a copy of that. But I saw you on Joe.
We'll have them send you.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Oh,
a
that's
copy, or you can video version read by the author.
Yeah.
yeah.
Let's do that for sure.
Cool.
Yeah, I saw you a couple weeks back on Joe Rogan. I was just sort of checking out the Joe Rogan show with you on it, and I saw you had a T-shirt on it that said, "It's not rocket surgery." I'm guessing it has to do with your book. What's that all about?
I've gotten so many about that T-shirt. I wish I should have been a brand ambassador for that whatever. So people, it's kind of a joke. I think there's even a chapter in my book called "It's Not Rocket Surgery,"
Right.
about doing medical training. But you know, the joke is it's not rocket science, or it's not brain surgery. So it's just a mix of the two.
Oh.
Okay.
It's not rocket surgery, which is like even harder than rocket science or brain surgery.
That's a cool shirt.
Yeah, you know,
Yeah.
we've all heard of the Mile High Club, the Mile High Club, right? We've all heard of that. 220 days in space is a long time. Is there such a thing as a low Earth orbit club? Can you give us the devil in the detail on chapter 29?
Well, I'll tell you what. You need to read the book, because there's a chapter called "It Was a Long 200 Days." So you might find the answer in that chapter, or you might guess it from the title of the chapter.
Oh,
Yeah, that makes it more exciting. Yeah, I agree with him, Todd.
Okay.
You have to read the book.
I was hoping to get the dirty stuff today.
Nah.
So I was telling you, I sailed
we were
around the
laughing.
world. I sailed around the world for about 20 years of my, the second half of my life. And it was sort of an old rickety rocket ship. I actually sailed around the world without an engine. So it's a different story. But one of the things that always seems to come into play on these journeys, and I'm presuming they do in space travel as well, is like some story about the toilet or the head. Can you tell us about When Nature Calls, or the glamour of space travel?
That chapter. So, space toilet. You know, this is like the most common question. A couple of different ways to deal with that. First of all, we have diapers for launch
Okay.
and landing and doing spacewalks.
Wow.
Because you're in your suit for hours and hours and hours, and that suit is big and bulky, and you can't get out.
All right.
And the American suit we called it the jaws of death, like this big zipper that, you know, if you had to go, you could brave the jaws of death. But you know, you really didn't want to do that. So
No way.
there is a diaper for that.
Okay.
But the normal space toilet, once you're in space, there's basically a hose for one and a can for number two, and airflow keeps everything going in the right direction.
Right.
So it works well, the way so it doesn't stink or anything like that. It's a pretty complicated system. We use the Russian toilet, and we recycle the urine into the American system, and that urine is turned back into water and oxygen, which
Wow.
is pretty amazing. So it's a really complicated recycling system. That's an amazing system. It's just complicated, and it tends to break, and there's a lot of effort keeping it going, but it works. And in space there's no water, so unless being able to recycle that is a really big deal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's pretty crazy.
Well, you mentioned about the spacewalks. Todd and I are both dive instructors. Tell us a little bit about your training underwater for
yeah.
spacewalks.
Absolutely, yeah. So the NBL is our pool in Houston. It's the NASA acronym for Big Pool, and they've got a mock-up of the space station. It's only about half the space station because the station is so big. They used to have a space shuttle, and they used to have a Hubble Space Telescope, but now they just have the space station. And they actually have some commercial things. So like the oil rig companies will use it to do helicopter ditching training.
Right.
In
Yeah.
case your helicopter goes in the water, how do you get out?
Yeah.
Right.
So there are some commercial people that use that pool, but for the most part, it's NASA. And you put on your big spacesuit. It's the same spacesuit, except for it has a air hose. In space, there's no air hose. It's actually a backpack with air tanks.
Right.
And we have divers that are safety divers and technical divers that follow you around and just make sure you're safe. Buoyancy is a big problem, as you know. And when you're
Sure.
diving, you got your BC and you put the air in and let it out. You can't do that in a spacesuit. So these big foam blocks that they stuff in your spacesuit to change the buoyancy, or weights. It just depends on the equipment you're lugging around and your body. Like if you're a little skinny 5th percentile female, you have lots of
You're
room.
walking
swimming
around in
inside
the suit.
I'm not that big, but I have a really big chest, and I barely fit in the extra large suit. Like
Wow.
I can't take
Wow.
a full breath even in the extra large
Okay.
torso. So everybody has a different number of foam or metal that they have to stuff in there to give you neutral buoyancy and also neutral angle. Like you don't want your left foot sticking up or your head leaning back, or they got to get the angle correct also.
Right.
So the safety divers have a really, it's an art. They have
Sure.
a tough job.
Wow. Yeah.
That sounds like some pretty cool
I know.
training.
That's why.
You know, I was also reading about those suits that they're rigged with, I guess what you call thrusters, so that if you ever did become untethered in space, you could actually pilot yourself around. Have you used
Right.
those?
They have used those for training. You know, when we first started building the space station, I think Mike L.A. Lopez Alegria was the first astronaut to fly with that back in 2000 maybe. It was a long time ago. So it's a jetpack on the back of the spacesuit with little I think it's CO2 cartridges.
Yeah, right. That's
that,
all of.
you know, they squirt out carbon dioxide and that pushes you. And so if you did accidentally float away, you could use this to control yourself and then fly back to the station. There's not a lot of gas in that. We practice that in the VR
It's short flight.
environment, and
Yeah.
you have to be like, there's no extra gas. I'm actually working on this VR experience with a Canadian company to let you do a spacewalk, you know, in VR.
Wow.
It's an amazing experience.
Wow.
They put together a really cool
Totally
graphics.
cool.
Hopefully it'll be coming out soon. We've been working on it for a long time, but one of the tasks, like we have Spacewalk, you have to go repair this piece of equipment that's broken. That's one of our tasks, and the other one is you have to, you know, fly back to the station. So it's a pretty cool
Wow.
system.
I'm in.
We haven't had to use it for real because people don't let go.
Yeah.
They keep a hold of the station.
Yeah.
Exactly. Well, back in 2007, I was one of the first Filipinas and first women in the world who has summited Everest or traversed Everest from the north side, from China, and back down to the south side in Nepal. And we had 3 years of training before that, from 2004 to 2007. And one of the things that really was very crucial in our climb is that we were required to sign a waiver stating that we are, you know, sane and we voluntarily commit ourselves in this endeavor, in this risky endeavor, and whatever is may happen to us, we're accountable and we know what we're doing. And we were asked to choose what we wanted to do with our bodies if we die during the climb. It's either our bodies will be retrieved or it will be left in the mountains. And I think I chose to be left in the mountains. At least I'll be preserved forever.
Right.
But, you know, I'm leading to this question because there was a part in your book. It says, what do you do when a fellow astronaut expires? And is there such
Right.
thing, you know, waiver and everything
How does
when
that
you
work?
go to space?
What happens when your partner expires?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I don't think I signed anything from NASA about that. Although I do think for space tourists, and that's becoming, you know, a thing now, they're going to have to really think twice before they take that risk, because spaceflight is never going to be perfectly safe. So that risk that you take is something that you have to, you know, actively take. Of course, as a NASA astronaut, we knew about it. I'm actually writing a project right now about Columbia.
Yeah.
I teach a case at Harvard Business School on Saturday about Columbia and Challenger, you know, the accidents that killed the crews, unfortunately. So it's definitely a risk. My hat's off to you for going up Everest, because that's something I could never. Some buddies of mine they've got a film project to go film at Everest, and they were asking me to get involved, and I said, look, man, maybe I'll go to base camp, but that's as far as I'm going. I'm not going any farther than that.
Yeah.
You should
I
definitely
couldn't.
go to
my body's
base
not
camp.
capable.
Yeah, we can
Yeah.
take you to base camp.
That's cool.
I would love to go to base camp.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Do
you
that
guys can
one
take
for
me
sure.
there, but I'm not going to go beyond that. I suck at aerobics. My body is not built for aerobics.
Maybe aerobics in this space. we'll,
In space, it's a lot easier. Yeah, pull-ups are a lot easier in space. So what you would do with your body, you know, we didn't honestly, but I did write the book. I tried to divide in the kind of easy to read short essays, and you can read it in any order if you want to, you don't have to start at 1 and end at 51. There's 51 short essays. You can read it in any order. But the chapter about that was kind of, what would you do? You could either bring them back, put them in a spacesuit, strap them in their couch in the capsule and bring them back, which would be kind of awkward to be flying in a spaceship.
Wow, on the
but
ride home, yeah.
You could put them in a SpaceX cargo ship, which also comes back to Earth safely.
Oh, okay.
And then they could have a proper burial on Earth. You could do a burial at sea, kind of push them out the airlock, do a spacewalk, have a ceremony, and do that, and they would burn up in the atmosphere. Or you could put them in one of the other cargo ships that burns up in the atmosphere.
Okay.
Be kind of like a burial at sea. If you're on another planet, you'd have the first ever space cemetery. You'd have to find a part of the planet and leave them there. If it's a place like Mars, we're really careful about contaminating Mars with DNA because there's implications there. So they may want to bring them back, although that's a long trip back from Mars to bring 200 pounds of body and whatever. So anyway, it's an interesting question. Thankfully, we haven't had to deal with it. But people are not. We don't last forever.
That's right.
And if we fly in space for long enough, it's eventually going to happen.
The life is fragile.
I'm pretty sure the psychological factor, the training that you are prepared for anything is really a significant part of your training and the whole, right? It's like it has to be part of that.
That's why they give us T-38 jets. Well, they don't give us; they lend them to us. They're Air Force supersonic trainers, and it's how I went to pilot training 30 years ago when I was a second lieutenant in the T-38. And as astronauts, we fly in those not to learn how to land a T-38, but to be in a jet going 500 miles an hour. And there's thunderstorms, and you're low on gas, and you have to work with your crewmate. And if you don't do it right, you might die. And so that, like, being in risky situations is something that really helps your mental ability and state. Anyway, it's hard to train that. I think it's maybe more of a characteristic, your ability to compartmentalize, and it's not your ability to not worry necessarily. It's your ability to just say, that's
what it is.
I'm going to take worry and stick it in this room in my brain and lock the door and later. I just wrote a scene similar to that.
Okay.
Yeah.
How my character was it's something that fighter pilots do and astronauts do, and it's a good survival mechanism.
Yeah, because it just gets in the way.
Having that, it's a terrible way to have a relationship. It's a bad way to be a spouse, but it's a good way to be an astronaut.
I like that one.
We'll get
That's
we'll
a
get
good
into that
analogy.
later. But right now, you have a lifelong passion for photography. Where did that all start?
Mm-hmm.
It's really nice.
Yeah, these are some photos I took from space.
Cool.
And I kind of squeezed them all together to make a background in my studio. So that started when I was a kid. My parents got me a camera. It was a Konica SLR camera, so you had to drop the film in and thread it, and then wind it, take the picture
It's
and
a
wind
manual.
it.
What's that?
Eventually, I got this power winder attachment. You put a bunch of AA batteries, and so it would advance automatically.
Yeah.
Right? So you go to a sports game.
High tech.
Anyway, so I had to learn about focus and shutter speed and aperture and ISO, and it was really good. And then you'd send off the little cartridge of 36. So it would take me a month or two to take 36 pictures, and then you'd mail it off. And there was this cheap place for $2.99. They'd process your pictures and send them back. And so I've got a big tub of all these old pictures that I took back in the 70s and 80s. But that was great. I learned how to take pictures, and I just always had a camera around my neck. Had a Canon EOS, Canon AE1 actually, for probably 10 years or more. And I've got a couple different cameras now, but yeah, I've always been a camera person. My kids, when they were growing up, were like, "Dad, stop taking pictures." But now this is the camera now, right?
Yes.
Yeah, it's pretty high quality as well.
It's amazing.
It's
amazing.
The IMAX, I got into photography and started doing films when I was younger as well. Which I'll get into here a little bit later, but the IMAX, as far as I remember, it used to be like a 70 mil
Yeah.
And when you were shooting IMAX, I'm presuming it was a digital format. What's the difference now?
We made the first ever digital IMAX space film.
Okay.
So, and my director of photography is a guy named James Nyhouse, and his handle is at 70 DP, so
Right.
70 millimeter director of photography. So in the old days, the first 5 or 6 space IMAX movies, which I saw them all when I was a kid. I would go to the Air and Space Museum and watch To Fly in 1976. I was a little
I
kid.
remember
I saw
those.
To Fly, amazing movie. And then Tony Myers was the director for Hail Columbia, Blue Planet, The Dream Is Alive, all these like iconic IMAX movies back in the 80s and 90s. And I watched them all. And then one day when I was at NASA, I looked on, I went, what's on my schedule today? And it said IMAX training. I said, this is awesome. And I went, and Tony Myers was there, and James Nyhouse, the director of photography, and a fellow retired astronaut, Marcia Ivins, was there. And she had filmed a couple of the previous IMAX films, Space Station, and I think another one. But so I got to film an IMAX movie when I was in space. It was the most important thing I did in space in over 7 months. It was the funnest thing I did. And I just lucked out. It just happened to be they were making the movie while I was in space. There was no thing. But Tony, when I directed this One More Orbit film last year, Tony was my inspiration. I dedicated the film to her at the end. And so it was really cool. To answer your question, those early IMAX movies had big, giant cartridges of film, 70 millimeter.
Yeah,
And she
it
did
was
them in
huge.
3D. The Space Station 3D and Hubble were both 3D. So you had to run 2 sets of film shooting through the camera at tens of feet per second.
Right.
Yeah.
So each box of film was only 3 minutes. So on several shuttle missions, they launched with 3 minutes of film. So you didn't want to
Don't screw up.
have 2 takes. You had 1 take.
That's right.
And you practiced it, and you made sure the focus was good, because one of the lessons I learned was if it's out of focus a little bit, they just throw it away. It's not going to be useful. So our film was the first ever digital IMAX movie. We had a Canon C500, kind of like a Hollywood video camera, and a Canon 1DC, which is one of those Super Bowl cameras, a still camera.
Yeah.
And we used a still camera to take pictures of the Earth. So you'd set it at 2 or 4 frames a second, and hit the button, and it would, take a bunch of still pictures,
right.
and then we'd send them to the ground, downlink them, and the IMAX software wizards would put them into this amazing video.
Okay.
And the movie's called A Beautiful Planet. I think Disney owns everything now. So basically, they have bought Earth. And so to watch, they had the IMAX films on Disney, if you have that, or on Hulu too. I think it was showing on Hulu. Anyway, so the Earth scenes were all through the still camera, and the scenes inside of the other astronauts were on the video camera. So there were several of us astronauts that filmed it, but I took a really strong interest in doing the IMAX movie, and I spent a lot of time working on that film. It was awesome. I loved it.
Yeah, great
great
work.
stuff.
Yes. So,
But real quick.
Yeah, sure.
Digital, all things. It allowed us to do night pictures.
Oh, right.
The film, as you know, is set for day. You could have night film, but they didn't. So that we had the first ever night images of the aurora and of lightning at night. Those are 2 really cool scenes.
Yeah,
in
I
the
saw
movie.
those.
And also, I had a GoPro. It was actually a Russian GoPro. The Russians went to Best Buy, bought some GoPros boxes to keep them in, and they lent me this GoPro. I borrowed it from them. And on my spacewalk, and took a couple of GoPro footages, and Tony edited into this amazing spacewalking montage.
cool.
And also it was in the Soyuz, so you can see me and Anton and Samantha getting in the Soyuz and doing that. So the digital really opened up
Yeah.
a lot of stuff. It's
for
not
sure.
film, but it allowed you to do it on a spacewalk, and it allowed you to take it in the Soyuz, which you can't take this.
It's not
massive,
possible.
IMAX camera.
Yeah. Well, there's always a pros and cons. When we summited Everest, we were advised to bring a backup, which is a manual camera, although we have a digital camera, just in case it fluctuates and it drains the battery. So we have a backup camera, and you have to take pictures in the summit. That's the most important thing.
Right.
So we did that. So I can totally see the advantages and of course a little bit disadvantages for now. So yeah, that's cool with the IMAX. Where can our audience find your work, your photography work?
Yeah, we'll pull that
That's a
clip
good
up
question. I have a website, terryvirts.com.
Okay.
And I actually, there's a couple of galleries that want to, sell some of my work on really high quality, glass prints or like what I have behind me. And the one contract just expired, and I'm still waiting to sign another one, so that hasn't been done yet. There's a gallery in Kansas City, and I'm gonna remember the name here in a second. But there's a photo gallery in Kansas City that did these
arts
probably 2 or
work.
3 years ago.
Something on your website. There was a link to like artsworks.com
Yeah.
or something.
Yeah.
And there's another entrepreneur, like entrepreneur, only entrepreneur.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
That's a website that has my stuff. So that's probably actually, if you're really interested, go to entrepreneur.com.
Entrepreneur. Okay.
And they have my work there.
Okay. Now, your fellow astronaut Buzz Aldrin, a mentor and a close friend,
Yeah.
wrote the foreword for your book, View from
He did.
Above. Can you tell us a
did.
little bit about this book as well?
So that was my first book. I don't have a copy of it. I wrote that book almost 4 years ago now. I wrote it over 4 years ago. Wow, it's a National Geographic photography book. And it's what I try to do is take a space flight in book format. So the chapters are just describing what space flight is like, but it was really photography, like a coffee table kind of book.
Okay.
It was awesome. I wrote that book in 2 weeks.
Wow.
I left NASA, literally the week I left NASA, I knew I wanted to write this book, and I talked to the Nat Geo editor. And so I set my alarm at 8 a.m. I was at my computer typing, and usually by noon I was done. I'm like, all right, my brain's full. So I'd go to the pool, have a beer, and then the next morning I'd set my alarm, wake up, and I wrote it. And I did a chapter a day. And after 2 weeks, it was 10 chapters, 11 chapters, something like that. And plus the foreword and acknowledgments and stuff. It was done.
Nice
Took
job. Good
Sundays
work.
off. And that was the first draft. And then we went
Yeah.
back and forth. But that was my first book that I wrote. And it was a lot of fun writing it.
Yeah.
Congratulations on another book.
Yes.
Yeah. So, you've gone through a lot of training in your life to get selected for the space shuttle. It's quite a rigorous job, I'm sure. What was the interview like with NASA, and what do you remember the most?
I think that's a story I've never told in any of my books. I have to keep that in mind. The biggest thing about the interview was that I shouldn't have been there. I was still a student at test pilot school, and on the application it's like test pilot school attended and year graduated and test experience. That's one of the sections you have to fill out as an astronaut, or at least you did back in the day before when we had the space shuttle. And it was like I'm still so everybody at Edwards Air Force Base wants to be an astronaut. So, but a lot of my classmates didn't apply. And I'm like, why not, man?
Yeah.
I know I'm too young, but this is why I'm here. I'm going to, I didn't apply when I was in college because I knew I was too young, but I'm like, all right, I'm a test pilot. Let's try it. And, the first round happens and they're checking on my application. They're calling my references, and everybody's like, ooh, and everybody's checking, who got their references checked, who got this. And then I get an interview, and everybody at Edwards was 1,000%. You're not going to get picked. You're just a young guy. And I'm like, you're right. I'm not going to get picked, but this is cool. I'm going to go have fun at NASA. And I did a practice interview with my buddies. So we sat around a table and they grilled me. And that was so important because interviewing can be awkward unless you're calm and used to it. And it's not a normal thing unless you've done it before. So doing that practice, I think, helped me a lot. And then when you finally get to Houston, it was a week-long interview. Now they bring you down twice. They bring like 120 people down at first, and then 40 people come down for the second round or something like that. But for us, it was just the whole group came down once. And so and it's shaped like a T, and they put the interviewee at the crotch of the T. So you've got like some people are over there and some people are over there, and it's
wow.
weird. It doesn't make
It's
any
a
sense.
different
Like, why are they doing this?
Totally.
Different setup.
But they do it, I think, just to mess with you.
Yeah, get in your head a bit.
they're just trying to mess with you and see
Right.
if you're gonna what you're like under pressure. And I was talking, and one of the astronauts interviewers was pregnant, and so like she was asleep, and one of the senior managers he was on the softball team, he was into baseball, and when he found out I like baseball, he perked up. Would you play on the astronaut softball team? And I was like, yes, sir. I'll be there for practice this week.
I'm on the
if you need me
team.
to. And I think was a big part of why I got picked, is because he needed people for the softball team, and I like baseball. And the other thing, I had done that French Air Force Academy exchange when I was in the academy, and the chief astronaut had also done the same exchange at the same academy 10 years before me. And so when I was at Edwards, we needed a guest speaker for our some event, and so I didn't know him, but I called the astronaut office, and he came to speak. So that was probably another thing that helped me out. But I think one of the things that was probably the most important for me was I just wasn't uptight. I was like, I get to hang out with astronauts. Like,
Right.
this was cool. I didn't worship them like celebrities or something. I just was.
It would be a
myself.
great job.
I didn't
These
have a lot of
my
pressure
people.
on myself. I just had fun, and I think now that I'm an astronaut and I know what they're looking for, they just want somebody they want to hang out with.
Right.
I mean, all 100
Isn't
people
that how it
are
always is?
super smart technical people, but you don't necessarily want to hang out with all of them. So
Right.
they have the luxury of being able to pick who they want to pick.
That's great. That's really a great story. You should write about that.
Yeah.
Another thing on that topic, you got selected, if I remember, it's around 2000 for NASA, wasn't it?
I
Somewhere
was in
there.
class of 2000.
Yeah, you're class of 2000, and just after that was the Columbia tragedy, right? So I'm guessing some of these were your classmates and friends, and was some really hard times at NASA. But you didn't do your first space flight for quite a few years after.
Right.
How do you spend your time? What do you do there during those years?
Yeah, that was rough. So Columbia, this is what I was writing right before my podcast about Columbia, because I was right in the middle of it. I was what they call a family escort, and your job is to go down for launch and for landing. Excuse me, launch and landing with the families, while the crew's in space. And so I was right in the middle of that whole thing.
Wow.
And then, so in the 90s, NASA hired way too many astronauts. And then they had a problem on STS-93, Eileen Collins' first command, and with some wiring, and that really delayed everything. And then they had this space station they had to build. And so these were really complicated missions, and they didn't fly any rookies on them because it was so complicated. They thought they could only fly flown astronauts. So it was great for the old guys, but for the new guys, it sucked.
Sure.
And then Columbia happened, and that slowed everything down. So all of these problems compiled on top of each other. And people my age, decade, Mandarin, it was a great mission. It was the final space station mission, assembly flight. And we brought up something called the Cupola, which is this big 7-windowed dome, which I took all these pictures from. So it was worth the wait. But, by year 8, I was like, all right, I'm ready to fly. I've been this has been pretend astronaut for long enough. It's time to fly. But the problem is you can't ever complain. Like you're an astronaut.
You're stoked to be there.
Your day job is pretty cool, even if you're not flying in space. You get to fly T-38s and do spacewalk training and go to the gym as part of your job. So it was a great job, but that wait, it's
a long one. Yeah.
There comes a point where you can only answer the question, "Oh, you're an astronaut. When did you fly?" "Oh, I haven't flown yet." You can only answer that question so many times.
Yeah.
Well. Oh, so when do you become a real astronaut, or you're not really an astronaut?
Right.
Yes.
It does get old after a while.
Exactly. Well, other than the scenes in the movie, Terry, how would you describe your training in layman's term, or
Those
description before going to
Those
space?
long, arduous years. Tell us
To
about your
people who
training.
do not have any idea or background about, with space science and being an astronaut.
Yeah. Well, I tried to do that in How to Astronaut. I tried to write it for anybody. It's men and women, old and young. It's definitely not for space nerds. I tried to break it down in like a relatable, fun, and wow kind of way. But the training is diverse. It's not the same thing every day. when you're assigned to a flight is when you're really busy with training. If you're an astronaut and you're not assigned to a flight, then you do other ground jobs like work on the new programs that are coming up, just going to meetings with engineers and helping them design a rocket. Or I was at Capcom for 5 years where I would go to mission control and I was the guy talking on the radio to the crew in space. I was in charge of the T-38 program for a while. So, you know, we have safety briefings and equipment and whatever. I was kind of the person. So you have these different jobs, but when you're in training, first of all, being in shape is important. So you got to go to the gym a lot. You have to do spacewalk training. You do science experiment training. You do systems training, like how does the space station communication system work, or the recycling system, or the thermal control system, or whatever. And like for me, I had to do Imax training, so I got to learn how to film a movie, which was fun. That was not had to. That was I got to.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of training. You have to go to Russia a lot because they're an important part of our International Space Station. So to learn their systems. Of course, I launched on a Soyuz, so I had to learn their launch vehicle. Most crews now will be going up on a Boeing or SpaceX capsule, but some will still go up on the Russian Soyuz, which I love. That was really great training. I love doing that. I had to go to Japan, had to go to Canada to learn how to fly the robotic arm, had to go to Europe to learn their module. So there's a lot of things. Oh, and by the way, I had to learn Russian language.
I saw that.
Wow.
And I was the crew medical officer, so I had to learn a lot of medicals. I worked at the Houston Medical Center for a week. In the emergency room and the operating room, and I went to the UT dental school to learn how to pull teeth, and I did the first ever filling in space. So
really?
It's a great job for an ADD person.
That is so cool. Yeah.
So you claim the ADD as well? Yeah, I'm kind of that guy as well.
Sure.
So maybe I can be an astronaut. Am I too old for that?
I tell you what, the good news is if you got 250 grand, you're not too old. So Virgin Galactic and Blue Origin are both going to be flying space tourists maybe this year. I think we've been saying this for a while, but I do think it's going to be in the near future.
Yeah.
You can pay for a ticket and go up. It'll just be a little quick 5-minute, you go up and come right back down. But you'll be in space, you'll be floating, you'll see the blackness of space and the curvature of the Earth. That'll be a pretty cool experience.
Yeah.
I think I'm gonna be a little short on the funds. I think I'll see their videos and travel pics instead.
Once space tourism comes back, you can do it.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm gonna pull up a clip. Now bear with me. I gotta get the studio engineer doing this. So
8, 7, 6, 5. We have to go for ready to start. 2, 1, 0. Booster ignition and liftoff of Shuttle Endeavour with NASA's final space station crew compartment that brings a bay window view to our celestial backyard.
Houston, Endeavour, roll program. Roger, roll, Endeavour.
This is Mission Control Houston. Endeavour's roll maneuver is complete. It is now in a heads down position on track for its flight to the International Space Station. 28 seconds into the flight, Endeavour flying at 1,100 miles per hour, 1.3 miles in altitude, and 7 miles downrange from the Kennedy Space Center, according to onboard computers. Endeavour's engines are throttling down as the orbiter passes through the area of maximum.
wow. Okay, so you know, I grew up.
I remember that.
Yeah, I'll bet. I bet it's something you never forgot. I grew up driving muscle cars and riding sport bikes, and I was pretty much into the rush of speed. But tell us a little bit about what's that experience like, riding rockets?
That's the name of a book by a fellow astronaut, Mike Mullane. He was probably 20 years before my time. His son is like my age. But I had been a test pilot and a fighter pilot, so I thought I had a Yamaha 80cc dirt bike when I was 8. So I like speed too, and I thought I had done a lot. And then on the shuttle, the engines light up 6 seconds before liftoff, and I heard this roar, and I thought, oh shit, this is something serious is about to happen. And
What's
then
happening?
the solid rocket boosters lit off,
Whew.
and nighttime turned to day. Why the Google, not right now, but just Google STS-130
Yes, yes.
launch videos, and people posted their home videos. You know, back in the day, this was 10 years ago, so there was no iPhone cameras, but there was point and shoot cameras. It's dark, everybody's cheering. You see the little engines light up for a few seconds, and then when the solids light up, boom, the whole nighttime turns to day, because there was a
Wow.
thin layer of clouds about
Right.
5,000 feet
So
above us,
reflecting
and the
off that.
rocket flames reflected off the clouds, and it was so loud, and it's like somebody grabbing you, shaking you as hard as they can, and you're instantly smashed back. So you're in a 4 million pound bomb, and the acceleration is so much that you get thrown back G's right off the launch pad. And that 3G, so it's like laying on your back with a couple of your buddies laying on top of you.
How
And
many?
so it's an amazing experience.
Wow.
The whole chapter 1 of my first book, and then a few chapters in How to Astronaut, were about that 8.5 minute ride into space. It was just experience after experience after experience.
Wow. Gave me goosebumps.
I
Just
wanna
looking-
It's
go.
amazing. Yeah, you should try it. I highly recommend it. Once tourism starts, and the money starts flowing, you'll be able to save it for that.
Well, after all the years of training, did you find any surprises in your first mission to space?
Non-stop surprises. I thought I
Always.
knew everything. I had read all the books. I'd been in an astronaut office full of astronauts for 10 years, and I'm very curious. I would talk to people all the time. What's it
Right.
like? The first view I had flying over the North Atlantic, we launched at 4 a.m, and so we're flying into the first sunrise, and it's like that. There's this blue before the
Wow.
orange, 5 minutes before sunrise, there's this blue line, the only blue, no orange. And I thought, my God, I've never seen that shade of blue before. It was really mind-blowing.
Mm-hmm.
And the shuttle had probably 1,000 or thousands of pounds of liquid oxygen and hydrogen frozen, kind of leaking out the engines as the engine went through the shutdown sequence. And so there's all this ice of oxygen and hydrogen ice, and it was flying past the windows,
Mm-hmm.
these
Okay.
thousands of little like fireflies out
Right.
there, with the sun shining on it, but we're still in nighttime over the Earth.
Amazing.
And there's this cloud of sparkling ice flying around us as I'm going into the most beautiful thing I've ever seen in my life, this blue sunrise. And I had to fly the shuttle, so I'm
Yeah.
like, I just wanted to look and go,
Yes.
this is amazing, but I got to fly the shuttle because we're about to maneuver.
Keep
so
your eyes on the
it was,
road.
it was like that for,
Yeah.
for over percent of what I did was just boring, and it was mundane work, and then 1% was like sublime. You're
Yeah.
seeing God,
Awesome.
and then you had to get back.
Yeah. Well, it struck me what you says. Like, you thought you knew everything after all the years of training, and then all of a sudden, like, it's kind of like the same with me in Everest. Like, we had intensive training for 3 years and nonstop training, and then we thought we knew everything. But when we got there and we really dealt with the real thing, like the mountains, like, phew, like everything's like, I forgot how to tie a knot. It's like I was just so amazed in how powerful the environment is. Like, oh yeah. So I get you. I hear you when you say like, oh, I thought I knew it all, but yeah, adapting to
Yeah.
microgravity, moving, eating, drinking, blood circulation. What's all like that in space?
It's a whole experience. Again, I've written a lot about it in both my books. The first thing is it doesn't stop. So on Earth, you can be weightless for a second if you jump off a diving board. If you go in the Vomit Comet airplane, I write about that. The pilot pushes forward, and as the plane does this, you get 20 seconds of weightlessness. But in space, it doesn't stop.
Right.
And the first couple days, man, my brain was not happy. It didn't know what was happening. I could only move fast. So if you need to turn around, if I could have done that, and I would have thrown up right away.
Really? Wow.
And I just had a raging headache. I really had a bad headache for 2 days. And then it was like a light switch flipped on the morning of my third day in space. My crewmate Steve Robinson asked me, "How are you feeling?" I was like, "I feel like crap." And then right after that, all of a sudden I felt fine. And when I went back 4 or 5 years later on my second flight, I felt fine. The neurons had been rewired and they just remembered space, and it wasn't a problem at all.
All right. It's kind of like
So that was really interesting.
kind of like altitude training.
Yeah.
You sort of
But we
remember
have
it.
something, right? So we have something we call it space brain. It's basically the weightlessness is probably disorienting, and your brain is spending a lot of effort trying to figure out what's going on, as opposed to normal mental calculation to do. And also, there's a lot of carbon dioxide in space, so a lot more than there is on Earth, and that kind of impedes your brain function and makes you crabby. And it's not awful, but astronauts really are, you kind of lose a few points of IQ just by going into space, and everybody knows it. Everybody's aware of that. And I would imagine it's a similar problem on Everest, where you're hypoxic and you're frozen, and probably the most dangerous thing there, from what I've heard, is just your judgment. I can hear you. I'm back. We dropped off for a second.
Yeah. Well, yes, you were saying Everest, and yes, it's true. I lost a few brain cells. I'm not so sharp as before. I can tell you that.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
it's a different reason.
Yeah.
You're hypoxic and we're floating and
Yeah.
carbon dioxide, but it's the same end result. Your brain slows down a little bit.
Oxygen,
Sure.
deprived,
years ago, I teamed up with.
Real quick.
Go ahead.
Sure.
I have an Everest story.
All right, let's do it.
So my colleague Scott Perezinski, good friend of mine, has been to Everest twice. The first time they had to turn back, and the second time he summited. He also ran the U.S. Antarctic program, so he was like the head doctor down there. And he flew in space 5 times on the space shuttle. He's one of these underachievers. So when we installed the cupola, we had this plaque that had a moon rock from the Apollo program, and it had a rock that he had gotten from Everest. And so on the ISS up in outer space, there was a rock from the moon and a rock from Mount Everest.
Cool.
It was really cool.
That is so
Right
cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I want to tell you the story. Years ago, I teamed up with Olaf Zipser to produce a film called Atmosphere Dolphin. Are you familiar with Olaf?
Olaf from Disney?
No.
Olaf Zipser. Olaf's like the king of skydiving, or like the Michael Jordan of the sport, so to speak.
Right.
Anyway, years ago, he and I, we did a film called Atmosphere Dolphin, and I got to know him pretty well. And he used to tell me about one of his dreams, and one of his dreams was to teach astronauts to fly in from the space station. He was talking about developing a special wingsuit that could handle the environment, so the astronauts could fly in from space, saving heaps of money and re-entry. Is this feasible?
It's funny you say that. So I'm a brand ambassador for Watch Company, and one of my fellow Omega guys has a company that is actually trying to do that exact thing, where you have a big heat shield. The problem is not the wing; the problem is the heat shield.
Yeah.
Because when you're asked,
You got 400 on the
he's trying
front.
to develop that exact kind of thing now.
Right.
Yeah, to get it from orbit where you're going Mach 25 you'd need a spaceship. But to do like the Virgin Galactic where you're only going Mach 5 and then re-enter, like that would be pretty cool to launch in the Virgin Galactic spaceship and then like jettison like a bomb and have a person come back to Earth. I think that would be a really cool thing. It's feasible.
It's feasible, okay, but not
You just
from the
need-
from the
some
space station.
engineering development. Yeah,
Okay.
and you need a crazy guy to be willing to do that.
Well, Olaf's your man.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so he taught skydiving. He's still teaching today, but almost everybody that he gets involved with becomes a world champion. And he developed what's called the Olaf position, which is, you see it now, it's quite common. It's the head to earth position. So, but anyway.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and I did a film with him called Atmosphere Dolphin. It was really cool years ago. I was pretty young, but really cool stuff.
I love skydiving. I want to get my license. When I was a cadet at the academy, I did skydiving with the French Air Force, and I jumped out. It was static line, so 1,200 feet, Army parachute kind of thing. And I was the last man out, and then I was looking down, and I was their parachute. What's happening? Ah! And anyway, then I was on crutches for a few weeks. Something was wrong with my parachute.
Was that
So
the
that
big
was
round
my
chute?
only skydiving until.
Right.
What's that?
Was that the typical like airborne chute, the round chute
Yeah.
that drops really fast?
It
Yeah,
was a round chute,
Yeah.
Army parachute.
those things
yeah.
are dangerous.
But it's it's the military, and the way they were teaching us was very different from the way the Americans taught. They were like, you have to watch the whole time. I only did like a couple of They have a little simulated airplane. You jump out of it and hit the ground 2 feet below your, to do your PLF, your parachute
Yeah.
landing fall.
Right.
And the Americans taught you to just watch the horizon and don't anticipate. And feet, knees, butt that's how you're supposed to fall. Feet, knees, butt.
Mm-hmm.
Stare on the horizon and don't anticipate it, but the ground and know what you're doing. It was exactly the opposite.
Yeah.
So instead of feet, knees, butt, it was feet, mouth. my tooth basically died, and I had like this brown dead tooth. Where, I wedged it for years. So then I took my son skydive free fall for his 18th birthday.
Cool.
And it was the only problem was it was tandem. I was with another guy, and I want to go just do that on my own. It was awesome. I loved it.
Yeah, I did that course as well, but I'm not going to tell him. I sort of won't tell that story. Probably get in trouble. I actually told him I had done my tandem. You're required to do a tandem first. All my buddies were in Rangers and Special Forces and stuff, and a lot of them were Halo qualified, and they were pumping me, like, dude, you got to do it. So when I go to the school there, they go, okay, have you done? Oh yeah, I did a tandem. I lied, totally lied, just to get through that section. But then the worst part, Terry, was that when I'm in the plane, I'm gonna jump. I go, shit, man, I should have never lied. What the hell? I don't know what I'm going to do. He goes, remember when you reached up and you grabbed the toggle and you pulled left or right? I was like, oh, I don't remember that part. So, anyway.
And then you got to know when to flare with the square.
Totally.
Yeah.
Anyway, I got it together and pulled it all off, but don't tell that story.
Yeah, you're still
That's
here.
awesome. And then when you're in your arch and you have to reach, but if you just do this,
Right,
you're
you
gonna start
spin.
tumbling, right? You got to do this, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Look, reach, pull.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, great stuff. I love
need
it.
to get my license. I've been too busy the last couple of years with traveling and writing and doing all this stuff, but I need to get back to flying. I haven't been flying as a pilot, and I need to get my skydiving license. So
Yeah, I saw
my
you.
bucket list is long.
You're in Dubai a lot, and you got a really cool place there, Skydive Dubai. It's got some pretty good instructors, so it's a pretty good spot. There's some good places in Texas.
We considered that.
Yeah.
I was there a few months ago, and one weekend it was either go scuba diving or skydiving. We were trying to decide.
Okay, next time. Yeah, so here's another thing. I became an ROV pilot a few years back, about 8 years ago. I got my ROV, underwater ROV. And recently I came across the Astro Bee. And I was curious, do you have anything that goes outside the space shuttle and can do the work that you do like on spacewalks now?
Right. So when I was there was this thing called Robonaut, which is this big, creepy, 10-foot tall robot. It's kind of cool, sort of, but it could be in a horror film too.
Right.
And my first experiment on my first day there was to work on Robonaut, and it didn't work, and it took me hours, and I felt so badly, like I screwed it up, but it turns out it was just broken. So we were testing it, but the goal was to let it go outside, and it can't do fine motor skills, but it could like move the equipment or get things ready for you, whatever. It could do some work. But NASA canceled it. The budget got cut. So I have said, hey, we should have these little robots that fly around, little drones that fly and do work. I mean, all that stuff would be possible. It's just money. And so the short answer is no. The long answer is it could happen, and I think that would be cool, but we don't have anything right now that does it.
Yeah, I'm guessing because oil and gas has got so much money in ROV now, and it's really taken off in the last few years, and so I see that's probably coming in the future for sure.
Yeah, a lot of automation is coming in all fields. It's going to kind of change human society in the next few decades, I think.
Yeah, we got a question about that coming up shortly.
Well, you're a retired astronaut, Terry, but you're still young. Do you want to go back to space?
So when you leave NASA, that's a one-way door, right? You don't go back to NASA. But, and I was ready. I was still young. I wanted to do film and books, and there's other things I wanted to do in life. I could have stuck around NASA and then maybe done the same exact thing 5 years later, but I wanted to do this other stuff.
Okay.
But there's private companies. Who knows? I always said if I could make a film, I'd consider going back. I love what I'm doing now. I'm super busy, so
That's good.
who knows?
Yes.
I don't long for it. I'm 7 months. I check the box, but space is pretty cool. It's a powerful drug. A lot of my colleagues they land and they get back in line, and they land and they get back in line. Some folks have a hard time giving it up.
Yeah.
Sure. So on a national level, there's a new space race brewing. Control of near-Earth space domain, space resources, leading actors being China and the U.S. What's your view on this?
Sounds like you're reading a press release. Space is super important. We wouldn't be talking right now if it weren't for space, right? It affects all aspects of our lives on a daily basis. And so it's really important that remain free and open and unhindered. It's kind of like freedom of navigation of the seas. You don't want pirates and making boats not able to try, or you don't want, people shooting down there.
Yeah, so the seaways are...
space to be hindered. Yeah. So it's really important. We've had a space force since the 60s. The military has had a bigger budget than NASA ever since Apollo. The old Air Force Space Command was about twice the size. It was bigger than NASA. And so they've recently reorganized that under Space Force, which I actually wrote an op-ed in the Washington Post a couple years ago. I think it makes a lot of sense because space is not air, land, or sea. It's a very different place. The things that you operate in space with are very different than airplanes, boats, and tanks. I actually think we should have a cyber force also, because cyber is super important. We just had this massive attack by the Russians. They attacked a lot of our government.
Bloody
so
Russians.
Cyber is really important too. And cyber is not air, land, or sea, and it's also not space.
So
I think it's important to let people work. We call it organize, train, and equip in the DoD, in the military. So I think organize, train, and equip makes a lot of sense by domain. That's why, we won World War II with an Army Air Force, but that didn't really make sense. And so it made sense to have an Air Force, right? Just because the air is not the ground. And in the same way, space and cyber are not air, land, or sea.
Sure.
Okay. Well, space resources, mining of asteroids, space solar power, technologies that can take the strain of our overuse of Earth's resources. In 2021, China is planning to catch a 10-meter asteroid and bring it down to Earth. China also already built the first infrastructures to receive energy from space solar power. How soon do you think this will happen?
Space solar power is interesting. I've actually was talking yesterday with the National Space Society. They're a big proponent of that. The sun's energy is limitless, and you can transmit that via microwave radiation. On places like the moon, you could use lasers because there's no atmosphere. You could use lasers on Earth, but the atmosphere really attenuates the energy, so microwave might be better. Plus, the laser beam, you wouldn't want to accidentally walk through that laser beam.
Yeah.
It's otherwise known as a weapon. So it's an interesting idea. The problem is with all of this energy going through the atmosphere, you don't want to fly through it. How is it going to affect?
So yeah, this would
birds?
have to be.
Is it going to affect weather? Yeah, but it's interesting, and it's infinite. We're never going to run out of solar energy.
Right.
So I think that is an interesting way to do things, and it could definitely happen. Mining asteroids is an interesting idea. It all comes down to launch costs. And to get to a place like an asteroid and bring it back to Earth, I haven't done the math in detail, but it would be hundreds of thousands of dollars a pound. So you'd have to be mining something that's
Got some
worth
value.
hundreds of thousands of dollars a pound or more to make it worth it. And there are some things that we don't have on Earth. So
Sure.
there are some materials out there in space that, might
Could-
be worth that.
Yeah.
Are we going to bring that cost down by an order of magnitude? Can it be tens of thousands of dollars a pound? I don't think so. I don't think launch is going to get that cheap anytime soon. But if it did, that would open up a lot more materials to make it interesting economically. Another technology I think is space manufacturing. I'm actually working with a startup. Some SpaceX alumni did a startup for space manufacturing, and they have some really compelling business cases for manufacturing materials in space. So we'll see where that goes, but that's another part of the space economy that hopefully will get opened up.
Yeah, so this is still on the same topic: space resources, quantum computing in space, 3D printing in space. What's the future? What technologies will really have impact in the next 20 years?
My crew actually did the first ever 3D printed item in space. We made a wrench, and that was like the first made in space. Yeah, the first ever
Nice.
3D printed thing. That is really interesting because on a mission to Mars, if you have to bring every possible spare part, that's a lot of stuff. So if you could 3D print some stuff, that would be. So I think that's a technology, especially for human spaceflight, that could be really good. You could use that same technology to manufacture things, space, and then bring them back to Earth. Because when you make things in weightlessness, their material properties can be really interesting. So I think that is definitely a technology for the future of space travel.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we have some friends, Tom and Tina at Python Space, and they're building a space system to go to Mars. This space system is light and fast, and it's kind of like, Edmund when he went to the South Pole. And then on the other hand, you've got Elon Musk, who's building a starship for hundreds of people to go to Mars. So we got a full-blown expedition-style approach, and we've got what you would call like an alpine-style approach. How would you plan and design an expedition to Mars?
So there was a great headline yesterday. Elon's Starship launches, maneuvers in space, and lands. It was like such a matter-of-fact headline for their Starship. The big thing for me for Mars is time. A normal rocket with chemical engines like Elon's Starship or almost every other rocket that we use, you burn an oxidizer and a fuel. It takes 3 years. It's a 6 to 9 months to get there. The Earth and Mars are going around the sun, so you got to wait until they align again, and then it's 6 to 9 months to come back. It's a 3-year total mission.
Wow.
You can do that with something called nuclear thermal propulsion, which instead of burning a fuel, you take a piece of uranium, you heat up the propellant just because it's hot, and then shoots it out the back of the nozzle. It's still a 3-year, 2.5, 3-year. It's a long mission. It can be cheaper because the nuclear rocket's more efficient. Nuclear thermal rocket is more efficient, but it's still slow. If you did a nuclear power plant that generated megawatts of electricity, you could do something called electric propulsion, which we use all the time on satellites on a really small scale. The engines are this size, they're small. But if you had megawatts of electricity and made the engine really big, you could go so fast that you could get there, spend a month on the surface, and come back in 1 year. You don't have you would get there like this.
Okay.
Right? You wouldn't have to wait till they go around the sun twice. Anyway, that for me, that's the most important thing, because at hundreds of thousands of dollars a pound or at $1 million a pound, which ends up being a pretty big, there's a lot of zeros in that cost. Okay. And cutting it down to 1 year hopefully could bring that cost down. And it's 1 year of radiation versus 3 years of getting exposed to radiation. Now you do have a nuclear power plant, so you have to deal with that radiation, but there's a lot of trade-offs. But I think versus 3 years is
You there?
I'm there. I'm here.
Yeah, okay.
We said lost
Yes,
you for a
yes.
second.
Yep.
So,
Agree. There's a lot of trade-offs in there. Yes.
let's get into the paranormal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is an interesting topic for I think everybody.
Everybody loves this one.
Have you had any UFO encounters during your career?
So, personally, I have not. There's a funny video on YouTube talking a UFO because I'm doing a spacewalk and there's like a flash, and then my hand goes to where the flash was.
Mm-hmm.
And the narrator's like, in there, astronaut Terry Virts in there, he's blocking the view of the UFO,
right.
and blah blah blah. And
They're
it's
going
like,
to cut the
right.
feed.
I knew exactly where the UFO was. I knew exactly where to put my finger, and the other 10 cameras on the ISS aren't going to see it. Like, it's just so ridiculous how these people say these things. So no, personally, I didn't see anything. Although I will say that these Navy videos that have been coming out are really interesting, and I think there's something there. I mean, like that is not normal what Fravor and the other.
Yeah,
Navy
so this
pilots
is Commander
saw.
Fravor. He's talking about the Tic Tac UFO. Yeah, that's
Dave Fravor, I think, right, or something. Yeah.
yeah. What's
So they've got F-18 HUD videos. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's incredible. That was one of the questions we were going to ask you, getting into the bit of the paranormal, because that's an incredible story. It's well documented, and yeah. What do you think is going on there? What's your thoughts?
I mean, between the Navy radars that were tracking this thing, the F-18, the Hornet infrared camera was tracking it. There was pilots in Oregon. A few were also making a similar sighting, and some other Navy guys off the East Coast. This was in San Diego, the big famous incident.
Right. Yeah.
But there were some sightings off the East Coast too, near Norfolk. I don't know. That thing went up and down quicker than things that normally go up and down, and I don't know what it was.
Yeah, it's bizarre.
I talked to a former Undersecretary of Defense. This guy's pretty legitimate, high level official, and DoD's had an office to investigate. So it clearly raised legitimate people's
security
eyebrows, like what's going
threats,
on here.
right?
It's been on CNN and New York Times. My first instinct is always to say it's not an alien is always the first answer.
Okay.
Whatever weird thing you see, it's not an alien, and there's got to be some explanation. But whatever explanation for this thing is going to be pretty crazy. Either somebody's got some crazy technology, or who knows what. But it's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
And also the Wameameya, whatever I pronounce that, the object that came flying through our solar system a few years ago.
Okay. Yeah. And
it's a really famous,
that's
well-documented
yeah,
thing.
it's a Hawaiian name, right?
It's like Wameameya. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it right, but
yeah. And
yeah.
the direct how it came into our universe and then how it left, it just defied the laws of physics, something like that.
Well, it was moving so fast that it didn't come from our solar system, so it came from another star, and I think that was the first time we'd ever tracked an object moving that fast. And my understanding, I'm not an astronomer, but listening to them, it had an aspect ratio, I think, of 11:1, where it was a cigar, not a baseball.
Right.
And so things that, as far as we know, aren't shaped like that. And the other really bizarre thing was it accelerated.
Yes.
Like, not only did it move fast, but vroom, it sped up.
Mm-hmm.
And things don't speed up unless they're comets. Comets have ice, and when the tails go on that way, it's comets moving in the opposite direction, right? It's just F equals ma. It's Isaac Newton physics. It's how rockets work.
Right.
But the astronomers specifically looked for ice debris or any type of trail exhaust, and they couldn't find anything. So this thing came in from another star for the first time ever that we've seen that. It was accelerating, and it was a shape that, as far as we know, can exist in the universe. Now, astronomers have come up with theories of how that shape could exist, and there are
could be a wing.
Potential expert. My favorite science fiction book. I used to write a blog, and I stopped that. Now I write books and movies instead. But that one of them was about science fiction books. My favorite science fiction book of all time was Rendezvous with Rama by Arthur Clarke, and that was a cylinder that came flying through the solar system. it was rotating to give it artificial gravity.
Mm-hmm.
And anyways, it was basically like
What
he
just
described
happened?
this thing
Yeah.
in this
Yeah.
book back in the 1960s or 70s, whenever that book came out.
Wow.
Cool stuff. Okay, I'm gonna pull up another clip.
Yeah.
Hang tight for a second.
Yeah, this clip.
Hang on.
Aliens exist and President Trump knows about it. That's
Hi, Alison. Well, this is quite a story, and it comes from the man who headed Israel's space security program for nearly 30 years. Chaim Eshed is making the extraordinary claim that the United States and Israel have been in contact with a group of aliens for years. Not immigrants, but extraterrestrials. He has called them the Galactic Federation. Good news is that he claims an agreement has been reached between the US government and the aliens, a contract to do experiments here. There's also, he says, a secret underground base on Mars where there are American and alien representatives.
Oh, my screen just died. There
Yeah.
we go. Terry, now, okay, I want you to be completely honest with us. Do you know anything about this?
Yeah, I remember seeing the headline with that. But here's my thing on that. So, you remember the 90s? We were all around in the 90s.
Yeah.
And there was this guy named Bill Clinton, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he had an intern named Monica Lewinsky. And he could not keep that incident under wraps, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if like one person can't hide that secret, how is the government hiding the secret amongst thousands of people about aliens, right? People say we didn't land on the moon. And I'm like, there are 400,000 people working in Apollo. Is the government really that good that they all stayed quiet for 50 years, you know?
Yeah.
And I had never really thought, I remember seeing the Israeli guy claims that there's aliens. I'm like, I doubt it.
This is a crazy
what-
story, man.
Now I know it's not true because he said we have a base on Mars. And how do we have a base on Mars? Like people would have noticed the massive launching.
Sure.
The Russians would have noticed the massive rocket launching. The Chinese would have noticed and there's a army of nerds that track satellites, and you can just go online. Of course, the Air Force and now Space Force tracks satellites, and it's probably harder to get their data. But there's private individuals that track things and they post it online and stuff. So if we had a base on Mars, where did the $100 billion go out of the federal budget, and where did the rocket launch from, and where is the tracking data? So we don't have that, and that tells me that guy's full of it.
Well, there could be the argument that they're riding up in the Tic Tac.
There could be that argument, right?
Yeah.
To
Anyway,
develop that technology would be there are black programs that are good at hiding
sure.
money in the federal budget, but you would have to hide the Navy in the federal budget in order to make something that big.
Yeah.
Which would be hard to do.
Yeah. I came across that the other day, and I was just flabbergasted. I was like, is this real? I couldn't even believe that this guy is saying it, especially coming from his background. So it's a crazy story.
So here's a big thing. This is super important. We have to have some wisdom and discernment, because there probably are aliens. I mean, there's billions of planets out there. There's a good chance that there's aliens. Personally, I think from what I know as a scientist about life, it's so complicated. I think somebody has to start it. I don't think it would just happen on its own.
Right.
And I'm not saying that from a religious point of view. I'm saying it from a scientific point of view.
Sure.
But anyway, if there's aliens or not, those stars are really, 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 really far away.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and to hear a signal from another civilization, whatever star they're next to, is a lot louder than they are, right? So the signal to noise ratio from some alien TV shows would be drowned out by the alien star next to them. So
Virtually
the
impossible,
odds of us ever having contact with them, if they came here, they would be so far advanced than what we can even imagine.
Yeah.
And they always go to Roswell, New Mexico. Like, if I came to Earth, I'd go to the Bahamas, or I'd go to the Himalayas or something. I'd go to the Philippines before I went to Roswell.
Yeah.
I love Roswell, by the way. I love New Mexico, but
Yeah,
you know
me
what I'm
too.
saying. So
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of conspiracy theories out there, and they're kind of fun unless they turn into a riot at the Capitol, right? We kind of have to tone down the rhetoric on some of the more crazy things. It's
Yeah.
fine. There might be aliens. I'm not saying there's not. I'm
Sure.
saying we ought to investigate the Tic Tacs, but I'm also saying, all right, let's have some common sense here and bring things under control too.
Right, I
Yeah.
agree. But interesting stuff. Everybody really gets into the alien story.
Yes, of course.
Everybody loves aliens.
Of
Yeah.
course.
Everybody loves aliens.
Hey, so we're gonna get into the next section, and you know, I kind of want to apologize. We're gonna have some hard questions a little bit here, a bit about current events, but
Sure.
these are things that are affecting all of us right now. And you have such a scientific background. I thought you might have some good insights or perspectives. So, for example, COVID-19 presented employers with a choice, basically to either find ways where workers do their jobs safely or shut down. Google and NASA achieved quantum supremacy. AI is learning from office workers and cloud data from around the world. Automated systems can detect insufficiencies and human managers cannot detect. Millions have lost their job in the pandemic, and robots and AR replace them faster than ever. Do you think robots will replace humans as motorized vehicles ousted horses?
So, yeah, we talked about this earlier. I think this is one of the biggest threats facing humanity. I read an interesting article last year about what nations are most at risk from automation. And China is pretty high up there because they have such a manual labor economy. America is actually not too bad. Like 30% of our workers were at risk from automation, whereas China was like 70%.
Mm-hmm.
And those numbers are society destabilizing numbers. You know, if 70% of China loses their job, the world is going to have a major event after something like that happens.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So we really need to be smart about how we manage automation. In general, I'm a fan of free trade, and in general, I'm a fan of efficiency. It's better to have a John Deere than 100 guys, vegetables from a field. But there's a real risk to losing your job, and you can't just be the heartless capitalist that doesn't care, because eventually that will lead to a revolution, and revolutions are not good things. They don't end well. So we need to figure out how to keep things reasonably moderate, respect humans while we let robots make our lives more efficient. But the Terminator, I'm friends with Jim Cameron, and Terminator, especially Terminator 2, was one of the best movies ever. I love Terminator 2. But in his vision, they were humanoids that came to shoot us with guns.
Mm-hmm.
That's not the robot future that I fear. The robot future I fear is this AI that knows everything that we're doing, automates away, and the algorithms that come with that have destabilized America, right? I don't know if you've seen The Social Dilemma. It's a great documentary.
Oh yeah, I did see
Yeah.
that. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm talking about. When you think about how they're using our data, and now they're taking, like, let's just call it office workers working in the Philippines who are in call centers. They're recording all of that. They're pumping it into the cloud. The AI is learning it. I mean, there's so much information being pumped into AI to teach it to do the things that we commonly do, and that's moving a lot faster now with COVID-19.
On top of that, you can make deep fake videos. There's a great deep fake video of Richard Nixon reading his speech. Bill Sapphire wrote a speech for Nixon to read in case of moon disaster, if the Apollo guys couldn't launch and they were stuck on the moon. It's a beautiful speech. It makes the hair stand up. Fate has determined that the men who went to the moon to explore in peace shall remain there and to rest in peace. It's an amazing speech. He never gave it, thank God. There's a deep fake video of Richard Nixon reading that speech, and it's real.
Wow.
You can't tell.
Yeah.
So just imagine if, in Jim Cameron's world, the robots become self-aware and they take over the B-2 bombers and they nuke us all and they shoot us with laser guns. That's not how it's going to happen. The computers becoming self-aware through AI, which is intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
That's a much more dangerous thing. And the government that we have around the world, they're either authoritarian governments, which are really bad, or the American government's been dysfunctional for over 20 years, where the Republicans and Democrats don't get along. We're about to pass a $2 trillion almost.
Yeah.
$2 trillion. That's
Yeah.
almost the whole
What's
size
going
of the
on?
federal budget.
Where's it coming from, man?
50 to 50. Well, no,
Oh God. Yeah, exactly. We're just going to double it.
Consensus. We're passing it 50 to 50, a $2 trillion budget.
How's that possible?
That dysfunctional body is incapable of legislating such a complicated subject, right? And when Twitter and Facebook are allowed to run these algorithms, really, really good at grabbing our attention. I've been stuck on this one game on my iPhone playing it. They're really good at getting our attention, at shaping our opinions, at radicalizing Americans, and whatever you believe in is going to be reinforced, and people are becoming radical or become radical on the left, and they're losing, wisdom and discernment. Really important, because they're threatening our democracy. And if there's no American democracy, if it doesn't function well, there are other options that are not good options. There's plenty of authoritarian options. And so this idea of AI, this idea of social media algorithms, this idea of automation, those are all things that can destabilize us in different ways. And it's kind of like this perfect storm that's coming. And it's not, that story still needs to be, we need to make sure we write the proper ending to that, I think.
Yeah, I want to go there as well. I want to say, so in retrospect, like the current events, big tech now effectively decides who has the right to speak, who has the right to assemble online, and who has the ability to build a business in the digital age. Does this strike fear in you at all, or make you think twice about voicing your true opinions in today's sort of gig economy?
So yes, so there's this idea of the woke,
cancel culture.
Cancel culture. It's a very real thing. I just read a while.
Right.
But if you do, then you're done. I've been speaking out against China because a good friend of mine, a journalist there, was captured as part of this. They're trying to get back at Australia. She's an Australian citizen. She's been charged. She's disappeared from life. Can't talk to anybody. They wiped her off the internet. It's 1980, and so I have spoken out against China. A lot of my colleagues would never dream of that, because you can't do business in China.
Right.
In Hollywood, and I want to get into Hollywood. I want to direct feature films. I want to do film and TV. If you say something that's not ideologically pure, you're blacklisted forever.
It can go a bad direction for you.
Hollywood is really trying to do the Chinese movie market is huge. If you've noticed, there's been some films recently. There were these films. The Meg, about the big shark, was a Chinese film. It was right where you are, the island, the Chinese. I did a speech there, like the tourist island off the south part of China.
Yeah.
Tubataha?
Anyway, so you can't criticize China. A friend of mine, Daryl Morey, who's the general manager of the Houston Rockets, he said, "Hey, we need to stand with Hong Kong." And there was a anti-NBA backlash. The whole NBA had cold water thrown on it. No one has spoken a word against China since then. The NBA's lost billions of dollars. China was a big market for them, and they stopped showing NBA games.
Shut it
They
down.
still won't show Houston Rockets games. Those are real bottom line dollars. So if you want to stand up for what's right, that's going to cost you, it might cost your organization millions or more dollars. And Americans are effectively, so you can complain about America, and you can say how bad we are, kneel for the national anthem, and police brutality, and America's evil all day long. But if you can't say anything against China if you work in the business community or even Hollywood, because you just can't.
Yeah, right. Yeah, so it's interesting where this is going in this cancel culture and the power that it has.
It's not healthy at all.
Not healthy at all. And I think, like, for example, when we're talking about COVID and stuff, we have a lot of people are being canceled. Like, some of the top brass in the medical field are speaking up about their professional beliefs on some of the COVID issues, and Facebook and YouTube can pretty much cancel them. And so my thought is,
Yeah.
is this,
Yeah.
how dangerous is this, like, to our science, when people will be scared to speak
Right.
their opinions, their truths, or what they believe is true? It's going to corrupt our science, I think, and people are going to start bending.
It will, yeah. The Twitter mob will just attack you, and so you have to be willing to not care about the Twitter mob, which is hard to do it sometimes.
Yeah.
To your point about how much power Facebook has, this is not our first rodeo. This has happened in America before, where the railroads were a monopoly.
Mm-hmm.
AT&T was a monopoly. Microsoft. There's been these big government versus antitrust cases, and I think the time has come for big tech. They're
Something's
they're
going to have
just
to
way
change.
too powerful.
Yeah.
If you've been following what's happening in Australia, it's really interesting.
Yeah, I don't really know that story. I did
this-
see how they weren't allowing
Yeah.
them with the news, but I don't really know that story too well.
If you just think about it, the press has been decimated. The last 10 or 20 years has not
Sure.
been kind to the press, and that's really bad. Like, we need a functioning First Amendment press in order to have a democracy.
A democracy, yeah.
Russia and China, newspapers have really been hurting, and you can Google something and it pops right up with the news stories, and a lot of the ad revenue from to Google, not to the content provider,
Mm-hmm.
and the content provider would be the news station, right?
That's who should be
So
getting the advert, right?
people are still paying ads for news. They're just not paying it on a physical piece of paper or print newspaper. And even when it's online, that ad revenue is going to Google, and it's not going to the Washington Post
Right.
or the Houston Chronicle or whatever.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting thing and Google's making plenty of money. And I can see the side of the Australians where,
Definitely.
tech should pay some of the
Something should
ad
go to-
revenue they're getting to the people who created the content. In this case, it's news.
Right.
That's like we have the democracy has a vested interest in having money go to the news organizations so that they can keep legitimate, free press around. And then the other thing, if Google or if Facebook just decides what's okay and what's not, and clearly there's been some stuff that's not okay recently, and there has to be some bounds.
Mhm.
But who decides that? And so we need to have a public discussion. This is public interest. This isn't
For sure.
a private company's private work. There needs to be some transparent way that, if you're going to restrict speech, that needs to be a publicly
This can affect
transparent
anybody.
way. And you know what? All speech is not protected.
Right.
You can't yell fire in a crowded theater, right?
Right.
You can't say anything you want anytime you want.
Sure.
But you can usually say anything you want at just about any time you want. So if you're going to restrict that freedom, it needs to be publicly, transparent.
Yeah.
But they also need to do it so that we don't have any more mobs trying to end our democracy.
Yeah.
So it's a tough
It is, but
question.
this
Yes.
is
But
definitely.
the people who have been in Congress for 40 years, who are completely out of touch with reality, all the leaders in the country are all in their late 70s. They're not able to think through these complicated. It's not just Democrats are evil or Republicans suck.
Right.
It's like we have to come up with some thoughtful policies here, and the crowd that we have in Washington capable of doing that. I hope they are, and I hope they prove me wrong. But we got a lot of data points that show that they're not able to do that.
Yeah, I grew up in America, and my parents are, in Washington State. And, my dad's like 85, and he's never talked about a conspiracy in his life, but now they're talking conspiracy theories and all kinds of crazy stuff. Things have really shifted in America, and it's sad. Hopefully, we can get back on track.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I want to move
We
on.
got to figure it out.
Yeah, I hope so. I want to move on a little bit here. This is kind of a hard question as well, I think. I know that you've been in the military. I know that through NASA, that you've been subject to probably more inoculations than most humans. So you've gone through a lot of vaccination processes. But this question, let's look at it here. So, for example, for the safety of humankind, we quarantine billions of healthy people. We ordered everyone to wear a mask. We shut down businesses, bars, and schools, et cetera, et cetera. In the beginning, you could really understand that. You could say, hey, look, we better do this. This is important because we were talking about a mortality rate. I think it was about 3%, which is 30 times greater than the flu. So, but now we're a year into it, and what we're seeing, which I think is quite striking, we're hearing world leaders advocating to vaccinating the entire population. This is what they're saying, and this vaccination really has only been under development for about a year, and it usually takes most vaccines. It takes 5 to 6 years at the least to get to the to the populace. This vaccine hasn't been through phase 3 trials, hasn't been through thorough animal trials. There's no long-term data on adverse side effects. It was ramrodded through FDA and the European medical agencies under the guise of Emergency Youth Authorization Acts, right? So I'm curious, like, your thought on, you're a commander of the International Space Station, and your responsibilities for the crew and the ship, like some of our world leaders are, right? They have to take responsibility there.
Right.
How much sense how much sense does it make, this crusade to vaccinate the entire populace, the entire planet, for a relatively standard respiratory virus? Does that dichotomy between this extreme quarantine to protect human and a rapid deployment of vaccines, these to me look totally different?
So a couple thoughts there. COVID is bad. A friend of mine, might be dying today. He called us to say goodbye a couple days ago, and then he was recovering, and I haven't heard from him for a couple days, and I just heard that he got bad again. So he's older, and anyway,
it's a
500,000 Americans is more than we lost in like World War I and World War II and Vietnam and Korea. That's more than we lost in the 20th century wars. So it's a bad disease. It's not the flu, but but it's not Ebola also.
Yeah.
But it's still a bad, serious disease. Wired magazine in November had a really great article about we should be vaccinating the social butterflies, and they have this interesting technique. This Israeli physicist came up with it. He basically said, ask somebody to name a person. I asked you to name somebody who you don't live with, and you would name somebody, and then they would go vaccinate that person, because the odds are you'll vaccinate somebody that you know that has a lot of contact with people. And the bottom line is if you vaccinate the spreaders, you can stop the spread. And this physicist said with 19%. Now, I'm not an immunologist or epidemiologist. I can't say that that's a real thing or not, but the point of it is really interesting. What we're doing is we're vaccinating all the people who aren't spreading it. So we're doing it the slowest possible way to stop the virus. But we're also, that doesn't mean we're not going to save more lives, because we're vaccinating the people that are most likely to die from it. If people in their 30s get it, it's a really low mortality risk, obviously. And so I thought that would have been a great way to do it. The thing that we could have done is really shut it down from the beginning. China did that, and they recovered within a few months. They had stopped it, not stopped it entirely, but they got 1.5 billion people. Their economy was back to work really quickly because they were like, just shut it down. If we had said, you're not allowed to come out of your house for 3 weeks, eat your crusty bread and your frozen dinners, and don't even go to the grocery store, the virus would have died. And no international travel. If we would have just shut it down, we would have had a couple weeks of hell, and then the virus would have been fixed. But that's not how we do things in America. We made fun of masks and said it's going to go away, and we played it down entirely. I think if we would have handled it better from the beginning, we could have had a better thing. But here we are, right?
Yeah.
So we have a year of data. We have the vaccines coming out. I think rather than having one broad, this policy applies to everybody, I think that people who are unvaccinated and at risk really need to be careful. If you're overweight, you need to be careful.
Sure.
If you're old, you need to be careful.
Yeah.
If you're young and healthy, if you're a kid, you need to be in school.
Yeah, exactly.
Because the damage we're doing to kids, especially poor kids.
Oh my God.
With parents who are working and aren't You know, like if I had my kid, I don't work. I mean, I'd work, but I work for myself.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they could have a great homeschooling experience. A lot of parents can't give their kids great homeschooling experience. And so the division that we have in society that's already bad is just getting worse from this COVID. So we need to figure out how to have targeted response. But a really simple thing is like, guys, just wear a mask. And that it's not perfect, but it does stop some. It's a pretty low cost way to stop some spread. And I've traveled internationally a couple times in the last year, and I had to get a COVID test. And when I got to where I was going, I had to, stay in the hotel for 24 hours or whatever. And I had to get tested once I got there. And it worked. They didn't have any COVID where I went.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but America has been having travel without requiring testing and stuff for a long time. Like we said we stopped the travel from China, but still 40,000 people came from China after we said that, and they were American citizens. So people say, well, they're American stuff, let them come back. But you could at least quarantine them. Like, yeah, come on back, but just stay home for 2 weeks and don't spread it.
They weren't quarantined?
So we haven't done simple things. We've done the really painful things. Joe Rogan is always harping on this, like shutting down restaurants.
Right.
Because that's killed the restaurant industry.
Totally. Yeah.
And he kind of has a point, because you're allowed to go to the mall, or you're allowed to work in in a factory, but you're not allowed to go to a restaurant. And he's got a point there.
Sure.
So I think we've caused pain that probably didn't need to be caused, but we've also didn't take it seriously when it should have been taken seriously. And that has led to a lot of unnecessary pain. So I would just wish we would have had a more intelligent, thoughtful handling of it.
Yeah, I agree. So here's another thought. So I want to say, for example, for me, there's a huge difference between like coercion and making free choice. And I'm not saying I'm anti-vax, but I'm definitely pro-choice. Our family, we're really believers in holistic natural medicines, and we really believe in healthy lifestyle as one of the best ways to protect yourself,
Right.
And I think just about a week ago, it was the International Air Transport Association announced that they're going to launch a COVID-19 travel pass, which says will give travelers a way to display test results of confirmed that they received the vaccination. My thought is, should medical intervention be a personal choice and not something be forced on people by businesses? What's your thoughts as a father, as a leader, and what's your response to this?
So, I mean, nobody should vaccinate you against your will, but I'm going to get the vaccine because I don't want to get COVID.
Yeah.
And there's enough. I mean, they did rush it, of course, but the mRNA technology that I think AstraZeneca and Moderna used, that technology has been in development for a long time. So, and although the trials happen quickly, there's been millions and millions and millions of vaccinations. So by the time I get it, we'll know if something bad's happening. And so far, there hasn't been any really bad results that I know of. Anyway,
my parents got their first shot about a week ago, 2 weeks ago, I think it was.
Yeah.
It was hard for them to get, and my dad was pissed. He was like, "Oh, they can't even get the vaccine in time." But anyway, they got theirs.
My mom had the same experience. She had her second shot today. So my stepdad's waiting on his second shot. So
it's not that easy to get.
It's amazing how quickly they've gotten it.
And
their neighbors died from it. So I want them to get it.
Sure.
And they want to come see their grandkids graduate from college and stuff, and the vaccine just makes that possible. So, but if you don't want to get, the reality is though, if you don't vaccinate, then you're benefiting from everybody else vaccinating. But as long as enough people do it, it'll stop the virus. The problem is, I just heard today on the news, one of these viruses, the South African variant, reduced the efficacy of the by like 5 times, which basically that's bad. That's really bad.
Right. Well, I grew up, on a farm in Yakima.
So it was shingles. My mom just got shingles.
Okay.
And it was like the worst thing that's ever happened. It was painful, and I didn't know you could get a shingles vaccine.
It's horrible.
But you can.
Yeah.
And I got it.
Okay.
And so hopefully I don't get shingles now.
Well, hopefully not, especially since you've been vaccinated. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, who knows?
Yeah.
But it didn't sound like something I wanted to get.
Yeah, for sure. I grew up on a farm, and I was subject to a lot of, I did a lot of work for my dad, driving the tractor in the fields and cutting the grass, doing a lot of spraying. But at a really young age, I started developing some pretty severe allergic reactions. My eyes were swelling up, and eventually I ended up in the hospital, and I was given, epinephrine.
Yeah.
And
Oh wow.
yes, it was, I had a couple bad sort of allergy days, and so they thought I was a good candidate for it's like an inoculation where they basically test you for grass pollens, dust, molds, and they shoot a little of that in your skin, and if you swell up, well, that's what you're allergic to. And then eventually they start giving, I had weekly inoculations in the back of my arms where they basically are shooting small doses of that into you, and it nearly killed me. So they had to stop this trial process on me. So I had that really bad experience. And I've had my whole life, allergies, and I got arthritis pretty early and stuff. But that's one of the reasons where I'm sort of, I don't know if I want to start getting into that again. I took a lot of vaccines when I traveled, yellow fever, typhoid, and all that normal stuff. But so
you don't want to get those.
Everybody's body's different, and that's the thing that you've got to be careful with when you.
That shingles vaccine hurt. I mean, the shot was fine, but like my arm was sore for over a week, and the day after I got it, I was like, I could feel my body. It's not shutting down, but my body was not happy. It really, I've never had that
sort of
experience from vaccine or any shot I've ever gotten. That was a pretty intense thing. A couple of days later, it was fine, but
yeah.
And I got skin cancer. Incredibly disgusting how much my immune system reacts to this treatment, and I was doing it, and I could literally feel my organs shutting down. I had to stop the treatment. It was over the weekend, so I couldn't talk to my doctor, and I called him on Monday, and he was like, "Oh my God, stop! Yeah, don't do it. If your organs are shutting down, stop that treatment."
Right.
So sometimes your body can react to medicine in bad ways.
Everybody has
to be smart about that.
Right.
Yeah. True. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, you have been quite an outstanding leader in life. You have been surrounded by leaders throughout your life. What makes a great leader, and who are some of those individuals that stood out and inspired you along the way?
That's a great question. Honestly, Neil Armstrong is one of the best. He was the first man on the moon, but just as a test pilot, and he was always calm. He was never, a yeller or uptight or whatever. He had a very calm demeanor about him, and he didn't say a lot, but when he spoke, people listened. So I always liked that about him, as opposed to people who were yelling and screaming. And so he was definitely somebody that I like. Another leader that I really looked up to that I loved was George H.W. Bush. Again, I'm not a Democrat or a Republican. I'm a very moderate middle kind of guy, and HW is a pretty moderate Republican. And
was that senior?
Yeah, he was so well prepared for that job. He had been a congressman. He had been an oil man. He left his rich, fancy East Coast lifestyle to live in Midland, Texas in the 40s, which was like,
the farm,
dirt and tumbleweeds, he really, people think of him as like this fancy rich. He made his own way in the oil industry, and he was a CIA director. He was an ambassador to China.
All right.
Vice president under Reagan. So he was a real at the time. She wrote him a letter thanking him for taking the time to meet us and our kid. And like a month later, we got this handwritten note from him.
Wow.
And in his book, he used to write. He spent Saturdays writing letters. That was Saturday.
That's a personal touch.
Saturday morning was write letters to his constituents or whatever. So he did that for us, and he didn't know me. I was I was just some guy. It wasn't like, he knew me. So anyway, he's a guy that I really look up to a lot.
Right on.
The letter he left for Bill Clinton is legendary. If you haven't read it, Google it. Just read
I will.
Read the letter that George H.W. Bush left for Bill Clinton on the Resolute desk in the Oval Office. That was a pretty brutal election. And they were, and he was a class act.
All right, we'll check that out.
Well, Terry, with all the exploration that you have been doing and you're still doing, I think, I can imagine your family is as solid as a rock, supporting you. Watching you take off, floating in space, and enduring the times and long days that you're not with them. So how is your wife, your kids taking all of this?
Well, it's hard on a family. I'm actually divorced now, and the astronaut career is can be really tough on families. This is one of the things that I'm writing right now with that theme. But they were great. It's hard. I've got a picture of them watching me launch, and it's just this giant white ball. So you don't know if I've exploded or what. And then it takes 10 or 20 seconds, and then you see the shuttle climbing out of this giant fireball. And as astronauts, it's a very selfish job because it's all about, you're the hero, everybody wants to talk to you, you're the all-American hero, you get to fly in space, and they get to sit at home and wonder if you're gonna make it back. So it's a tough, it's a challenge for families for sure. And then at least for me and for the fighter pilots, you're compartmentalized, and it's whatever. And when I was flying, my kids were young for my first flight. For my second flight, they were teenagers, so it was actually kind of a good time to be in space for 200 days, leaving teenagers behind. But they don't fully understand. I think they're starting to understand more now as they get older. And like my son is studying the Columbia and Challenger accidents in his engineering for his engineering degree in college, and he's like, "Wow, did you know they did this?" I'm like, "Yeah, I know the guy who did that." And so anyway, they appreciate things later, but in the moment it's hard to appreciate it.
Sure.
Aside from that, is there anything else you want to explore?
The problem with being an astronaut is that your bucket list gets too long, and I say that a lot, and it's true.
Yeah.
So just seeing this for 7 months, there's a lot of places on Earth I want to do. I love directing, and so I'd love to direct feature films or things like that. I've got a lot to learn, but I've got a few projects in the work that I want to do that. I've got a couple TV shows that I want to do, but one of them is one where I go and visit all the places I saw and just get to know the people. What live here? What do you eat? And so it would be a way to show that people, no matter where they're at, but also see these really cool extreme, the Philippines or whatever, Siberia, the Krakatoa volcanoes of Indonesia, the jungles of Africa. There's a lot of cool places on Earth that I want to visit and see.
Definitely. There's a lot of cool stuff here. Janet and I started traveling pretty young. It's been one of the greatest things, one of the greatest learning tools for me throughout life. So really an advocate of travel and expanding our horizons, so to speak.
And that's the irony. That's the irony of it all, It's like you thought you knew everything, you thought you saw everything, but once you done that experience, it just dawns to you, and you realize that there's so much more to explore out there, So,
there is.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Keep exploring.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Terry, I think we're running out of time.
It's been 2 hours.
Yeah, pretty
It's
cool
like a
stuff.
Rogan podcast.
Yeah, watch out, Joe. He's gonna step aside. We're coming up on him real quick.
Yeah. Well, I started my own podcast too, Down to Earth with Terry Virts, and
cool.
I've only done a few episodes, but they've each been about an hour and a half long. There's just a lot to talk about.
Yeah, man. What's really cool is you get to share this time with somebody, and you share this information, and we find, we're really new at it. I think this is your number 8, our 8th episode. And at the end of it, when you get off the podcast, you're like, wow, man, that was cool. I really feel great and lifted by all these new thoughts, these inspiring things, and this information. We're sharing information. You're learning from others while bettering yourself. So it's pretty cool stuff. I like it.
And thank you.
Today I interviewed Chris Benninger. She's the CEO of Guide Dogs for the Blind.
Okay. Yeah.
Trains golden retrievers in labs to help blind people. It's amazing. It was the coolest.
Wow.
Yeah, I was really happy after I was done with that.
Yeah, it's a great feeling. Yeah, congratulations. How long have you been doing this, and how many shows you got?
She was number 4.
All
So
right.
it hasn't dropped yet. It's going to drop. I think we just got approval on iTunes and Spotify. So I
Yeah.
think it comes out next week. My producer is going to start dropping one a week.
Yeah, that's
We'll
what
see how it goes.
we're doing, the one a week, and
Yeah.
you know, it's a family project for us. So we're doing all the editing, all the website, all the stuff together. My son has really become an incredible editor.
Yeah.
So
That's not editing is hard.
It
Oh,
is.
Editing is
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
part of his homeschooling actually. He's 14 years
cool.
old. Yeah. Well,
And his homeschooling. I might add, he wrote out the questions today, or was part of that
yeah.
homeschool project.
Can I
Great job.
ask
You did a great
one?
job.
Yeah. Can I ask one question that he
Sure.
wrote? Like, how high is the atmosphere?
So, it's for thousands of miles, like 1 molecule per cubic meter or something.
Right.
Like their atmosphere goes up pretty high. By the time you get to either 50 miles or 100 kilometers,
Dropped out.
you know, above, at Mount Everest. So how many feet is Mount Everest? 20,
29.
Yeah.
four,
not 29,000.
29,000,
So
yeah.
9,000 plus meters. There's not a lot of air.
Yeah.
At 100,000 feet, there's really above 50,000 feet. They say your blood can boil.
Wow.
Above 100,000 feet, instantly, right? There's not enough air, and above a couple 100,000 feet, you know, above that altitude. So that's a tough question to ask. But
Yeah.
100 kilometers is you're pretty much in space. You
Yeah.
get astronaut wings in the Air Force above 50 miles.
Okay.
All right.
So, yeah, usually, like in diving, it's 14.7 psi seawater, I think it is. And
Right.
that's how they measure an atmosphere. But he asked me that question, and I said, well, that's a good question. I don't know how to answer it.
Well, we wish that
It gets thinner and even at the space station. Yeah.
Go
the
ahead.
space station's 400 kilometers up, and
Oh,
there's
yeah,
still
there.
some atmosphere there. The atmospheric drag on the space station lowers it by a few meters every day, maybe 10 meters a day. It depends on the sun's activity, actually.
Oh.
So there's a little bit of very, 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 very. If you open your visor, you would die instantly. But there's still a few even an atmosphere on the moon. It's super, super, super thin. If you open your visor, you would die instantly. But there's a bit of gas around the moon.
How cold is it outside the space station when you do a spacewalk? I'm curious about that, because when you know how much protection, the insulation on the suit. Go ahead.
I've seen different numbers. It's roughly plus or minus 250 degrees Fahrenheit for red energy, and the temperature just means something else. If you know, when you're in the sun, it gets really hot, and when you're in nighttime, it gets really cold. I remember feeling cold one night, and when I was on a spacewalk, and as soon as the sun rose, I warmed up instantly, like that second. And then I got really hot one time, but it was a heat that I'd never felt before, because it was like needles jamming me heat. It wasn't like Houston, or it wasn't like the Philippines, where it's just the air is hot and humid and that kind of thing. Or you jump into 40-degree pool and you scream like a little girl because it's so cold, right? But if you're in 40-degree air, it's cold, but you're okay. In space, the temperature is just a number, because there's no thermal inertia. So the temperature kind of is meaningless in terms of human experience on Earth.
Right.
Oh, wow! I'm learning a lot.
Yeah. Great show. Great to be here.
Yeah.
So, another thought I was thinking about was, you know, I've done a lot of stuff up in high latitudes, and you know, like in the winters we have constant night, and during the summers we have, you know, constant day, right? And I was really curious. I know how it affects me there. Like in the summer, I'm up all night. I'm up all day. I'm a 20-hour day guy every day.
Right.
So how does that affect you when you're going around the Earth? What is it, every 90 minutes? How does that sun that affect your sleeping habits?
You know, it doesn't. We on our watch we have GMT, so we're on London time, and you wake up and based on London time, this has seasons. Sun is off the left or right. It's not on your nose. If it's on your nose, you're half in sunlight, half in darkness. But if the sun's off to the side, as you're going around the Earth, you're constantly. So that was not fun. The first day, it's kind of really cool. But after a day or two of that, it was like you couldn't see anything on Earth. It was always easy. You could never make out anything on the ground. You could never see the stars because the sun was up. So it was this weird kind of limbo for a week of high beta.
Wow.
So it was kind of interesting to have a season in space. I'd never heard anybody talk about that before, but it was kind of depressing when we finally had our first sunset after a week of no sunsets. It was like a celebration. On the
Where's the sun going? Sun
cool.
salutation.
Yeah.
Right. Cool.
All right.
So, Terry, thank you so much for all your views and perspectives and sharing your time with us today. What a great show. What a great time. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, and send me the link when it's ready. I'll post it.
Okay. All right.
All right,
Long
see you
live
guys.
and
All right.
prosper.
Bye. Thank
All
you.
right.
Bye-bye.
All right.
See you,
Bye-bye.
bud. Take